Whether you visit our many historic sites, explore our thousands of acres of parks, launch a business, or study at one of our acclaimed universities, you'll agree Mercer County has it all. Mercer County, picture yourself here. Mercer County Executive Brian Hughes and the Board of Commissions are proud to sponsor Mercer Local Influencers.
Presenting Mercer Local Influencers, featuring leaders in our community whose positive influence is bringing energy, growth, and vitality to Mercer County. Presented by YourTownTube.com, FitFeb and WellTube, and Stimulus Brand.
Good day, Mercer County. This is John Gertica, host of Mercer Influencers. I'm here with a very special guest today, Linda Mead, who's the president and CEO of the DNR Greenway Land Trust. And Linda and I are going to talk a little bit about her background and the things that influenced her early on in her career, and then take some time to talk about some of the special projects that you've been involved in over the years as well. But Linda, you are a PA, originally from PA. I spent some time in Bucks County where you grew up, and you went to school at Rutgers, and you studied landscape architecture?
I did. I loved landscape architecture because I loved thinking about how people and land interact. So I started out by thinking about landscape design on individual properties. And then as I got further into it, I thought, you know, what I'm really interested in is the bigger picture. What's the big vision for how we preserve and care for the earth and care for lands where people can go and interact in places like Greenway Meadows Park right here in Princeton? So that led me to my career with a land trust.
And your early work started in Bucks County as well, but was influenced by the Delaware River and the sojourn you were telling me about. Would you share a little bit about what that has meant to you over the years?
Sure. Well, I grew up in the Delaware River watershed. So, you know, I believe that, you know, it's not about our street address. It's about the natural area in which we live. And so I worked at the Bucks County Conservancy for 10 years before I came to DNR Greenway. And while I was there, the National Park Service connected me with two women, one from the Middle Delaware and the Poconos, and one from the Upper Delaware. And together we started talking about how can we teach people about the importance of preserving land along the Delaware River. And the best way to teach is to get people right out there to experience it and have a fun time while they're doing it. So we created the Delaware River Sojourn, and it is an 8-day canoe trip. Started out canoes, today it's more kayaks. But it goes down the river, different sections of the river, all the way from the headwaters in New York State, all the way down into the estuary area. And it's still going on now, which is 27 or 28 years now that that's been active.
And in planning that and orchestrating it, you've involved a number of people. There are people from the national parks, people from the local historical societies, probably for those various areas. Tell us a little bit how you involved people in that project, or still involve people in that project.
So you know what's important about any of the work we do? It's all about collaboration. None of us do it by ourselves.
Right.
So after we had that first meeting of 3 people, we gathered a second meeting, and all of a sudden there were about 25 people there. And they represented different organizations up and down the river, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, New York, Delaware. And we started to talk about how we could bring together and highlight the work of each of those organizations. And so as you would travel down the river, we would have a hero each day. It was a Lord High Admiral or a Lady High Admiral.
Right.
And we would anoint them, and we would celebrate what they'd done to protect the river. And then we'd have local historians or local naturalists come along so that people were learning as they were having a good time. But importantly, it was all these different organizations that planned that and made it happen. And then the folks that came out on the river, you know, became advocates. You know, if they started out as they like to take a canoe or a kayak trip, but all of a sudden now they know what the Delaware River is all about and they help protect it. Or sometimes it went the other way. we had one fellow that came out, he had never been in a canoe before. And he came out on the first Delaware River sojourn, and I remember him because his grandson was born as we were canoeing down the river, and he got the phone call. Well, you know, fast forward 25, 27 years later, and he's bringing his grandson out there on the river, and he's helping lead the river journey. So, you know, what a fabulous thing.
And you never know where those conversations can lead, but with people coming out, you find that this person is an expert in this field, and we really should listen and hear and then befriend them. And I would imagine that some of those friendships and acquaintances and introductions led you to being asked in the late 80s to serve with what was then just a smaller version of the DNR Greenway Trust. Tell us a little bit about how you were approached and what the organization was like back in those days.
Oh, sure. So DNR Greenway was an idea of 4 people who got together back in 1987. And they met at the watershed, then the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association, now called the Watershed. And in 1989, it was determined that they had a specific mission, and that was to preserve land. And it was a little bit different, but very complementary to the watershed.
Right.
And so that group of people formed a separate nonprofit 501c3 organization,
Right.
DNR Greenway. And I was approached in 1997 to become the executive director then at that time. And the reason I was approached is that through the work I had done on the Delaware River sojourn and gathering all these groups together, we had started a coalition called the Delaware River Greenway Partnership. And that group, again, still active today, was made up of organizations in the central area of the river here in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And I co-hosted meetings every other month. And so that group then came to me and said, some of the members of that group were active with DNR Greenway Land Trust, and came to me and said, there's this opportunity, and we think you'd be great for it. Why don't you apply?
Right.
So that's how I was introduced to the organization. And what excited me when I came and met with DNR Greenway Land Trust, which was in a little Sears Roebuck cottage that was rented for $1 a year from the state and had no matching furniture, and I came in through the back door through the old kitchen. But I sat down with a group of trustees that were just incredible. You know, here we were with some of the best brains in the area, and these folks knew how to get land deals done, and they knew how to raise money to make it happen, and they just needed somebody to help lead them and take that vision forward. So it was a match made in heaven.
Well, and continues for those of us that take advantage of the open spaces that you've helped preserve, that the organization has. You mentioned earlier the collaborative efforts, and clearly you put together a formula with that group of people in those conversations. Tell us a little bit about how you have developed that sort of formula of, again, involving people maybe of differing opinions at times, but also differing professions.
Sure.
And tell us a little bit about that formula, if I can call it that.
So, you know, I was thinking about this, John, and you know, it really, every land preservation transaction you do is different. You know, a different person, a different family, a different corporation, whatever it may be, owns that property.
Right.
And they all have different goals. So you have to start there. You have to start by listening and understanding those goals. And you have to make sure that that fits within the goals of the organization. So once you find that common ground, then you can find your way through to whatever needs to be done to be creative, to compromise, to find a solution to what somebody is really looking at, which is, you know, what's going to happen to my land in 50 years.
Right.
And so making that happen involves a whole lot of people. So it involves science, it involves understanding the land, it involves engineers, it involves surveyors, people that do environmental assessments. So anytime you're doing this type of work, you really have to be somebody that can work in partnership and bring all these folks together.
Right. We'll talk about some of those partnerships and the pieces that now make up the organization and the open spaces that you maintain. But I also wanted to point out that you told me that you've served as a college for other people in the country that want to have the sorts of alignments and programs that you do. Tell us about what you've done with the Land College, I believe it's called.
It is. And what's interesting is when you think about all these different players to protect land, one of the things that you may not think about is a financial advisor. And I was really fortunate because when I first came to DNR Greenway 25 years ago, I did a little seminar about land preservation. And one of the people that came and sat in the front row was Wade Martin. And Wade Martin's a financial advisor who grew up in Montgomery. And he called me afterwards and he said, you know what? He said, I had 100 kids in my graduating class. Today, it's crazy, and we need to preserve land in our community. So he became a volunteer, and he and I became a team that would go out and work with landowners and listen to what did they want to see happen, how can we make it happen, and how can they meet their financial goals at the same time, which can mean all different kinds of things.
Right.
And so after we successfully did that a number of times and realized that other land trusts, other groups that were doing land preservation didn't really have that tool,
Right.
We wanted to share it so that more land could be preserved. And so for several years we brought together selected land trusts and financial advisors from across the country. And they came to our Johnson Education Center here in Princeton. And we spent several days where they brought in a problem. And over those 3 days, we solved that problem. But importantly, we sent them home with their own Wade Martin, their own financial advisor that they could work with going forward. And what I can tell you from that is, yes, there was a mountain preserved in Alabama. Yes, there was land preserved in Connecticut and Virginia, and a whole partnership that was created in California that all came out of those projects that land college talked about when we were right here in Princeton.
So the formula of collaboration and conversation was taught to others for those purposes, which is wonderful.
Exactly. Because any acre you preserve is going to affect all of us, whether it's here, whether it's somewhere else. You know, it all contributes to clean air, clean water. So preserving as many acres we can in as many places as we can is, I believe, the most important thing we can do.
It is. It's great work. We're going to take a short break. We have a message from Tom McManaman at Stimulus Brand. We'll be back after a short break.
Hi everyone, I'm Tom McManaman from Stimulus Brand. When we're invited to serve a new client, naturally we get excited and begin to imagine the creative things we can do. But we know from experience the importance of tempering that excitement and first gaining important learning. Before we speak about creative approaches or photography and film techniques or show off our portfolio, we want to hear from your customers. What works for them and what doesn't? What messages resonate and which ones fall on deaf ears? After all, your customer and their needs and expectations are your reason for being. The learning can be valuable to many people, management, marketing decision makers, and to our creative team as we set out to create new work. It's like an Oreo cookie. The cream in the center together with the cookie makes for a tasty experience. As you consider hiring a firm to distinguish your brand, elevate your business, and make for some sexy work, first make sure they're interested, investigative, and engaged in your business. That will help you savor the cookies they serve up later. Learn what we can do for your brand. Visit stimulusbrand.com.
Need a new adventure? How about a riverside walk? Or a catch in the park? Or maybe something closer to nature? To bring you and the people you love closer together. Come visit us again soon. We've missed you. Mercer County is open for business.
Mercer Local Influencers. It's powerful.
Mercer Local Influencers. Sharing is caring.
Mercer Local Influencers. It's powerful.
Mercer Local Influencers. Sharing is caring.
Mercer Influencers. Sharing is caring.
Mercer Local Influencers.
Powerful.
Mercer Local Influencers. Sharing is caring.
Princeton local Mercer influencers. Sharing is caring.
And we're back with Linda Mead from the DNR Greenway Trust, Land Trust. Thank you, Linda, for helping me with that. We were talking earlier, Linda, about the influences that you had in your life, and then the influences that you're exerting to others, which I think is great, and in a collaborative way. Let's talk about some of the projects. There's a number of them, so let's start with your favorite. What is the seminal one that you would like to talk about? One that really was the central piece to some of the continued successes you've had as a group?
Well, I think it's important to talk about, in 2001, we preserved 2 properties, Greenway Meadows, which most people know on Rosedale Road, and the property that's known now as Farmview Fields on the Great Road. And so the Farmview Fields property, I think people know less about that. And on one side of the road you have the Wynant Farm, where there's a vineyard. If you drive up the road now, you see a vineyard. And on the opposite side you have this this meadow, this field that where kids go to play. And so when that came to us to be preserved, it was going to be developed into restricted age housing, and there were 165 or so units that were going to go on the property. And Bob Hillier was the developer for that. And he had taken that all the way to just about final approval. He had preliminary approval and he was ready to go. But it came to us and folks said, is there any way you can help us preserve it? And we said, you know, we work with willing sellers, and Bob is the seller of record because he actually has the contract to develop the property. So we went and worked with Bob and sat down with him, and he said, well, I'll tell you what. He said, I care about Princeton. I will give you 3 months to raise the money to buy the property for preservation. And we set a number on that, and if I recall, it was something around $9.5 million. And so DNR Greenway went to work. And so in 3 months, we came back to Bob Hillier and the Wynant family and said, guess what? We raised the money. And so that was such a grand success to be able to then preserve it. So when we preserved the property, half of it became public park. There was a piece along the bottom end of the farm that was also preserved as a trail that goes over to Mountain Lakes. And then the farm itself, which actually goes back to a King George grant, was permanently preserved through a conservation easement that DNR Greenway holds on the property. So that was a great example of all these different players having to work together. And to raise that money, we talked to a lot of people in the community, and a lot of generous people gave us private donations to make it happen. And then we put that together with the State Green Acres program and Mercer County money and the funding from the local township. So we were able to put all that together and dedicate the park, and that was such an exciting day when you see something really come to fruition like that. But it proved that it could be done.
So again, it was the people involved, the collaboration. The collaboration included not just the seller and the owner of the property and the developer, but also then county and state and federal regulators or entities who also had an interest in that you could help identify to say, hey, this makes sense. This makes sense for the community. This makes sense for the state. So
and local people that cared enough to step up. It always comes down to that in the end.
Right. So that's one project, and there's multiples. What did you find as the next sort of challenge to take on as an organization?
So I think that was 2001. In 2010, we preserved the St. Michael's property, which had been the orphanage in Hopewell. And for that, we had to raise $11 million. My favorite story about that is about a little girl, Callie Considine, who went trick-or-treating. And we had a deadline of March 15th to raise the $11 million. And Callie went out on Halloween trick-or-treating as a tree-hugging hippie. And she carried with her a jar. And instead of UNICEF, she was collecting for St. Michael's. She was so encouraged that she set herself up in the local coffee shop. And then she collected money until March 14th when she brought me over $3,000. And I was able to say, Callie, it's because of you. You're the icing on the cake. You made it happen. This is the last donation, and we've now made $11 million. So, you know, how exciting. And again, you know, a kid, a 10-year-old kid made that happen.
Well, we can learn a lot from people at all ages, and clearly Callie was part of that process, which again is part of the formula that we spoke of earlier.
Yeah.
The latest project is the Barbara Wall Johnson property.
Yes, yes.
Tell us about that piece and what it may mean, because at this point it was a recent dedication to the D&R Greenway Trust, Land Trust, but there's planning that's ongoing right now.
Oh, absolutely. So much to do. So over 20 some years, I worked closely with Betty Wall Johnson. She was a tremendous philanthropist who really cared about land. That was extremely important to her. And over 40 years that she owned this property in Hopewell, where she lived, Hillside Farm, she gathered together different parcels of land and she purchased them to create one large block of land that was almost 800 acres. And when she passed away in May of 2020, everybody wondered what would happen to this property. Now, the good news is she had put a conservation easement on that property with us in 2013, but she had added to it since then. So there was more land that was not permanently restricted. And so we were so pleased in 2021 when her two sons came to us, Ambassador Robert Wood Johnson IV and Christopher Johnson, who are the co-owners of the New York Jets. And they came to us and said, you know, we've been thinking about what to do with this property and we'd like to give it to D&R Greenway. So it's a place where we will create a park in the name of Betty Wall Johnson to honor her and honor her vision, and open that up to the community. Right now, we're doing a lot of inventory work to find out about the birds and the plants and, you know, where are the habitats we need to preserve. So exciting this spring, our birders found bobolinks nesting on the property.
We wouldn't be able to identify a bobolink, but they did.
It's a grassland bird and they're endangered and threatened in the state of New Jersey. And so how wonderful that we're preserving this habitat. So we will very carefully begin to open that sometime next year so that people can start to experience for themselves. What's great is when you're out there, you're in the middle of that property, you look around, you see nothing but land. Land, lots of land.
And we are very fortunate to be in an area where there are those opportunities. I think they're becoming less and less over time with development and with the amount of population that we have. But to have those spaces and to have the collaborations with the county and with the state to connect those properties is quite wonderful and quite, I think, unique to this area. I've been in other areas in New Jersey, and yeah, there's some wonderful parks, but to be able to connect them must be fulfilling for you and see them connected over the years.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, I can't imagine anything more rewarding than to kind of start with something where it's an idea and then see the actual physical park that's created. And what's really been rewarding to me is to sit at the Greenway Meadows Park, because that's where my offices are, in the Johnson Education Center, and I'll sit outside sometimes in the evening and watch the people that come. And you see families, you see people walking dogs, you see bikers, you see, I've watched people go to the top of the hill to have a wedding. I've seen people doing yoga. I mean, all these things. And what you start to realize is that, you know, land is something that belongs to an individual when they own the property. But they are truly just the steward of that land, because once they preserve it, it belongs to everybody. And all these people come out and it becomes meaningful in their lives.
Well, that's wonderful, and I'm so glad that we had this time today to be able to hear a little bit more about an organization I think many of us come across at times or see signs or see open space that's dedicated, but don't know all of the collaborations that occurred to make that happen, and remarkably the amount of funds required. So, as you said earlier, the business side of the equation is important. The legacy that you expect is that this will be a symbol and a working organization going forward, but again will serve as a working organization in the Land College to teach others this type of work.
Absolutely, and I think if I look forward 20 years from now, you know, I think about the places that we're preserving now and the fact that they truly will be priceless places in our community to visit. And one of the places we have preserved is Point Breeze in Bordentown, New Jersey. And that's a place where we're creating a discovery center. So I can foresee people coming to that, learning about that special place that was once the home of the Lenape and then the estate of the exiled King of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte. And people will come and they'll learn about that. They'll go out on the land, and hopefully those kids and those adults will go home and they'll incorporate conservation and ethic into their life of caring for the earth.
So Point Breeze is a project that's currently underway, and that's sort of in the southern quadrant of areas that you've been working, and in the Bordentown area. Does it overlook the Delaware?
It does. It's right on the border. The Crosswicks Creek is on its boundary and the Abbott Marshlands, and you look at where the Crosswicks flows into the Delaware. Incredible views.
For those in our audience who are interested, how could they find out a little bit more about the DNR Greenway Land Trust and some of these projects?
Well, you can go to drgreenway.org, drgreenway.org. You can also stop in the Johnson Education Center on Rosedale Road. We have art galleries there that are themed to the work we do, and we have programs, and come get involved. I mean, it's great, and you can meet lots of like-minded people. And so people enjoy and make friendships and have fun and learn something at the same time.
So it truly is a center for people to visit, stop by.
Absolutely.
During regular hours. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, again, thank you for your time today. Thanks for coming in, telling us about yourself and about what has brought you to this place and helped us all preserve the spaces around us. Thank you very much, Linda.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. We'll see you again for our next episode of Mercer Influencers. Thanks for joining us today.